Hello and welcome to Good Evening Britain, a Force for Good's weekly show coming to you live from our studios here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow, with me, your host, Alistair McConnachie. We are broadcasting on all our digital platforms throughout the United Kingdom and across the world. We're bringing you quality pro-UK comment and analysis every Wednesday from 7 until 8 p.m, broadcasting on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on TikTok. Folks, please do send in your greetings. Please tell us where you are watching from. Please send in your questions and please send in your comments. We've got another packed show for you this evening, and at the bottom of the hour, we have our guest tonight, who is Dr. Alan McManus, the chairman of the Freedom Alliance Party. This is a party that's standing candidates in Scotland and in England at the British general election on the 4th of July. So we're looking forward to talking to Dr. McManus this evening about his fantastic work that he has been doing in the freedom scene for the last 4 years at least, when the Freedom Alliance came to our attention. So that's definitely something and somebody to stick around for. At the bottom of the hour at 7:30, we'll be talking to Alan until the top of the hour. We're also going to be talking about the SNP Manifesto, which was launched today, and folks, we're going to make that as exciting as we possibly can for you. We do have a few choice comments on, for example, what they have to say or not say about one of Scotland's greatest resources, which is, of course, our North Sea oil. Are they rising to the challenge of saying that they're going to turn it into cash for Scotland, or are they backing down to the Green lobby and trying to make excuses for doing nothing? We'll look at that later in the programme. Now, you may be wondering what this flag is behind me. This is the British monarchy flag as used in Scotland. Okay, the UK monarchy flag as used in Scotland. The British royal family flag as used in Scotland. And it's quartered with the two lion rampants, the Irish harp, and the English three lions. And it differs slightly from the British royal family flag that's used in England, because in England there's only one lion rampant and 2/4 are the three lions. And why, you might ask, have we decided to decorate our background with this today? Well, every Wednesday we're looking about for a suitable date that we can fly a different background, and today is the birthday on the 19th of June back in 1566 of one of the men who has been most responsible for bringing us to the United Kingdom that we know today. I am talking, of course, about James VI, who was born today in Edinburgh Castle to Mary, Queen of Scots. And it was when Elizabeth I of England died and she had no children, no immediate heir, that the line went back to the Scottish line and to the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, who became James VI of Great Britain, the 6th James in the territory, which by that time became the realm of Great Britain. And so we remember him today, and we remember, of course, his Union of Crowns back in 1604. So this is why we've got this flag up in the background today, James VI's birthday. Good stuff. Let's say hello to one or two people who have said hello to us. Good evening to Debbie, first in. And to William Armstrong, who says, Rat City Council. Which city are you referring to there, sir? There's a few that need to be cleaned up, certainly. Freaky says, Alistair, good to see you, good sir, good to see you also. And to Stuart from Elgin. And Anselman says, first of Great Britain. No, the 6th of Great Britain is our point, because the territory became the realm of Great Britain, and he was the 6th person to be crowned king in that territory. That's the way that we frame it, and I know that's original, and I know that nobody else does that, but we thought high time that we started this, because people say, oh, Elizabeth wasn't the second Elizabeth in Scotland because Scotland hadn't first Elizabeth. No, she was the second of the United Kingdom, of the territory. She was the second Elizabeth in the territory which had become the realm of the United Kingdom, just as James was the 7th king in the territory which had become Great Britain. Whether they were Scottish or English aside. So that's the way that we look at it. Hello to Derek from Armadale, as always. Good to see you, sir. Let's begin with the SNP. The SNP Manifesto. Oh my, do you know, there's so many people now saying that they're absolutely going to tank. There was something released today, in fact. There was a new poll released in the Herald, and it says a new poll has predicted the SNP will lose all its seats in Glasgow and be left with around 15 MPs after next month's general election. The survey by Ipsos Mori has the Conservatives winning just 115 seats, with Labour on 453, giving Labour a 256 seat majority in the Commons. It says here, on these results, the Conservatives could be heading for their worst general election defeat in modern political history. However, this particular poll actually says that the fate of the SNP is still not very clear. They call it much up in the air, because the data which they're using from Scotland is, guess what, it's not up to date enough because of the problems with the Scottish census. The poll urged caution over its results in Scotland, saying they should be interpreted with particular care because census results have not yet been published at the constituency level, meaning we have had to rely on 2011 census data. Right, that's 13-year-old census data. There's been huge changes in Scotland in the last 13 years. Much of which, no doubt, the Scottish so-called government is trying to hide from us. And so until they get this, they're not clear about the adjustments which they make. As they say, this means the model is working with less accurate population data at the constituency level, and the risk of error is higher. But they're still saying that from what they're working with, it doesn't look too bright for the SNP. Well, there's going to be 57 seats. 57 seats in the Scottish part of the general election. There's 57 seats, and the SNP have said that if they win a majority of those seats, then that will be a mandate for them to push for a second separation referendum. Well, a majority of 57 seats would be 29 seats, and could they get 29 seats? That would be down like 20. That would be down about 19 from what they are at the moment. Let me just work that one out. They're at 47. Well, it'll be down 20 because they're at 47 just now. So, could they get that? They might. You know, they might get 29 seats. They might get 29 seats because it's not as if Labour's really setting the woods on fire. it's not as if you can detect this big sea change in Scotland that, oh, Labour are so wonderful. Same throughout the rest of the United Kingdom. It's not like people are saying we're all going to vote for Labour because we're totally inspired by it. It's really just voting for the least worst. In England, it's because people are fed up with the Tories, and the Tories haven't delivered on anything that they said. And in Scotland, people are just kind of fed up now with the Scottish National Party. In fact, that was actually very clear, and they're fed up with the Scottish National Party because the SNP simply just focuses all the time on independence. In fact, in this article here, it's over for the SNP and voters have finally realised. This was from the 13th of June, a few days ago, in the Daily Telegraph. And Alan Cochrane here talks about the programme on the telly where Swinney was lined up with the other leaders, and he got a real seeing to from a Glasgow mother who said that she was sick of him blaming everyone else instead of accepting his responsibility for poor performance in wholly devolved areas such as education and health. The blistering verdict, it says here, of this Glaswegian mother took him by surprise when she insisted that he should accept responsibility for the SNP's failure in these areas, which were entirely the responsibility of his government. She said, quote, "I want a direct answer. Glasgow parents and Scottish parents are sick of you passing the buck. We're sick of hearing it's Westminster's fault that education is in crisis. We're sick of hearing what Labour and the Tories would do. We want to know what you and your party are going to do to fix what's happening in education right now." And when Swinney tried to dodge her barb, this lady shouted out, "Stop passing the buck." And of course, Swinney responded by saying, that so-called independence would enable him miraculously in some way to tackle such problems in a way that he's not able to tackle it at the moment, even though education and the NHS are wholly devolved. So, as somebody else shouted out at him in the same programme, "Tidy the flat before you move out, John." So the SNP really are kind of getting it in the neck, but whether that will be enough to reduce them to 28 seats. Okay, 28 seats would not be a majority of seats. It would still probably work out that they'd be the biggest party, but it wouldn't be a majority of all the seats. Will that happen? It might well happen. It's certainly long enough. People are kind of sick, really, I think, of a Conservative government for whatever it was since 2011, I think, was the coalition government, wasn't it? And the SNP have been in power for about the same amount of time. And people are just tiring of that now. So change is in the air. Change is in the air. To what extent did change appear in the SNP Manifesto? Well, let me just bring up the SNP Manifesto right now, and let's just quickly run through some of the points in it. Vote SNP for Scotland to become an independent country. Now this is interesting. This is interesting because what this is saying is what Sturgeon used to say was, people vote for us, but they don't want independence. Well, in this case, the SNP are very much putting independence first and central to basically their entire platform. So you can't be voting for the SNP and not being aware that this is the case. And in fact, the logo which they're likely to use as well is going to say Independence for Scotland on the ballot paper. It's going to say SNP for Independence. And so they're very much going back to basics on this. And there's a load of bletheration here. Our key pledges: deliver independence, to strengthen our economy, tackle the cost of living, and bring about a fairer economy. End austerity, blah, blah, blah. Rejoin the EU. No, thank you, okay? We're not wanting to join the EU. So, again, tackle the cost of living crisis. Well, that's fine intention, but what are they going to do about that? By providing urgent support for household finances and reducing the impact of rising interest rates. Well, that money's going to come from the British government for those sorts of matters. Protect our NHS from the twin threats of Westminster privatisation. Well, Westminster couldn't privatise the NHS in Scotland if they wanted, because it's wholly devolved, and nobody is intending to privatise the NHS anyway, even though some people would think that might actually help. And blah, 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 more stuff here. Blah, blah, blah. Support the abolition of the undemocratic House of Lords. Well, Labour are intending to push that idea anyway, so if the SNP get elected, they'll be pushing behind Labour for that one. But this is where it starts to get problematical. Devolve powers to create a bespoke migration system for Scotland that values those who decide to work, live, study and invest here, and allows us to address our specific demographic and economic needs. What that is simply political speech for more immigration. That's what that's about. More immigration is essentially what they're disguising there by saying devolve powers to create a bespoke migration system. It's not devolving powers so that they can stop immigration, so that they can have less immigration. That's devolving powers so they can have more immigration. And this is what the SNP will do. That's what the SNP want. And you know what? Labour might even be stupid enough to devolve those powers to the SNP. Scrap Trident. Well, that's one that we've certainly heard before. Nothing new there. Increase maternity pay. Defend free university tuition in Scotland. It's really just all the old favourites. There's nothing new here. There's no new offer here. That's a good one, actually. I approve of that. Scrap the two-child benefit cap. We wrote an article just the other day about the importance of the family, and we said that child benefit should not be capped at a certain number of children. It should just be for as many children as you have. That would be the pro-natalist point of view, and especially if it's said that we need more people, which we don't necessarily, but certainly encouraging Scots to have children is one way of dealing with that, rather than bringing in people from abroad. Why? In an independent Scotland, decisions about Scotland will be made in Scotland for Scotland. Well, guess what? That's already the case. Okay, we already make decisions in Scotland about Scotland, in Scotland. In fact, we're making one on the 4th of July, and everybody who is involved in the British general election is, in their own way, making a decision about Scotland, in Scotland, for Scotland. So that sounds clever, but it's no different from what we're actually doing right at the moment. Independence is vital because decisions taken at Westminster have made life more difficult for people, families, communities and businesses across the country. Well, people are certainly often in difficulty, but the idea that the SNP is going to solve that, or that an independent Scotland would somehow be making better decisions, is of course highly questionable. And if you believe that the SNP's record, and if you believe that their sort of attitudes to things would in fact make life better, then of course vote for the SNP. But I don't see any evidence that they are likely to make better decisions for the families, communities and businesses across the country. Ending austerity, taxes, prioritising public investing and Brexit. Just blah blah here about rejoining the EU. Nothing that we've not heard before. Stuff here about the Constitution. And then here we get into the big thing, which is whether or not they're going to support North Sea oil and gas in the manner that they used to do so. And what we're discovering here is that they have no new plans to do that. The most they're going to say about supporting the oil and gas industry is that they're going to take an evidence-based approach to oil and gas. Whatever that means. The UK government is the decision maker on these new licences. We believe any further extraction must be consistent with our climate obligations and take due account of energy security considerations. Decisions must be made on a rigorously evidence-led case-by-case basis through a robust climate compatibility assessment. So it's all about believing in the net zero story, and they're going to make rigorous evidence-led case-by-case basis on whether a license should be given or not. Well, let's make a rigorous evidence-led case-by-case basis on the SNP's record to date, and I think we'll find that it's not particularly impressive. So that's all they're going to say about oil and gas, other than supporting a just transition, which is their euphemism for transitioning Scotland from an energy-rich country to an energy-poor country, from a warm country in winter to a freezing cold country where you have to impoverish yourself every time you put on the heating. That's what they call a just transition. They're good with words, good with disguising the consequences of their policy through clever words like just transition. If they said support the North East in our efforts to make Scotland much colder during the winter, it wouldn't have such a snappy feel about it. And here we go, surprise, surprise, rule out new nuclear power plants in Scotland, because the last thing we want in Scotland is clean energy, apparently. So, more blah blah, but here are three important policies which tell us again that they just want to flood Scotland with more immigrants. Devolve power to create a bespoke migration system that values those who decide to work, blah blah blah. We've read that bit. Introduce a rural visa pilot scheme. This is for people to work in the agricultural sector. And they're wanting overseas workers' employment visas to be devolved to Scotland. And that's the kind of policy that the Labour Party would be stupid enough to grant. The devolution of overseas workers' employment visas. To that we would say that we should be working out farm programmes, temporary farm programmes for unemployed people in Scotland who want to do that kind of work. Until then, it is vital the UK government acknowledges the distinct demographic challenges we face in Scotland and introduces a pilot to mitigate against labour shortages as a result of hostile immigration policies. Hostile immigration policies? There was literally 1.2 million people came into the UK as long-term immigrants in 2023, and the SNP calls this a hostile immigration policy. That tells you where they actually are. If they think importing 1.2 million people is like racist and hostile, then that just shows how extreme the SNP is. Mitigate the harm of what they're calling Brexit on productivity by reviewing immigration rules and expanding shortage occupation lists. No, we've looked at that before. This idea that there's shortages, there's always going to be shortages. If your immigration policy is just simply to import cheap labour, there's always going to be a shortage of it. Because cheap labour needs more cheap labour to service it, which needs more cheap labour to service it. and so on and so forth. Well, you know what, folks, I think we've had enough of this SNP manifesto, other than to say on the two issues that matter, which is to say net zero and controlling immigration, the SNP are so far on the wrong side that even if you're a dyed-in-the-wool Scottish nationalist, you cannot be voting for that party. You cannot be voting for that party. Now, a party that you might want to vote for is the Freedom Alliance, although they've only got one candidate in Scotland. They've got 4, I think it is, in England. But we're going to see if we can bring in Dr. Alan McManus. Now, I know that he's had a wee bit of a problem with his internet, so we may only have the sound, but we'll see. Let's click on this and see. Dr. Alan, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. My apologies to you, Alistair, and also to your producer, Megan. The thing is that I don't have a camera on one device and I don't have a microphone on the other device, so this is why there's two of me. You should be able to see me, but that's okay.
We've got a kind of fuzzy look here.
Okay. I don't know why that's. I've got my camera in front of me, but my phone in front of me, but that's it's not working.
Right.
Okay,
right.
You might have to just imagine me and just hear my voice then.
We'll imagine you, but before we imagine you, we'll put up a photograph of what you actually look like.
Okay.
So that people know. There we go. That was this. In fact, we could. Well, that's Dr. Alan McManus speaking at a Force for Good's Free Speech Rules rally on the 20th of April this year, when the Humza Yousaf had his own anti-free speech rally at the other side of the square, and Alan gave a fantastic speech for 15 minutes, which is on our YouTube, and we'll put out the link to Alan's speech where you can see him in his full glory on our YouTube page. And so there's another picture there of Alan as well, and there he is as well. Very good speech. Thanks for that. Alan, what I'd like to talk about here is if you can just tell us what is the Freedom Alliance, for those who have not heard. It is a political party. How did it start? What was the motivating reasons behind it?
Well, it started like many good projects in the back room of a pub, and this pub was in Yorkshire, and there was a few people got together and in 2020, and they were really fed up with the violation of civil liberties that was happening at that time, and they were only going to be, to use your phrase, a force for good in that region. But then they decided that they really needed to expand, their manifesto, and there was lots of other people who wanted to join in. There was a lot of Scots, actually. So at first, it was a party based in Yorkshire and Scotland. Then people from all over Great Britain joined in. Not Northern Ireland, because there's a sister, not exactly a party, but a network of independents called Freedom Alliance Island of Ireland, who are a similar party, not quite the same, but similar. So we're not established in Northern Ireland. Anyway, since then, we've stood hundreds of candidates in local elections and in devolved elections and in parliamentary elections. And we've always had a good relationship with other freedom parties in England and Wales and Scotland, among them your own, Alistair, more recently. And I think people are just, people are fed up of the uniparty, of the, two cheeks, same posterior choice at the polls. And of people who are career politicians who just do not care and who lie. And we try to We try to just be ourselves. You know, if we don't know something, we'll say we don't know. We call ourselves a listening party. We don't pretend we have all the answers, because we don't. And if you've got a better idea, then we'll listen to you and hopefully learn from you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you have built. Was it originally started as an actual political party, or was it just a kind of movement?
It was kind of a movement at first, but then it was first registered in 2021, and since then we had to re-register recently for a technical bureaucratic reason, but basically it's the same party since 2021. I think that some people in the party struggled a little bit with the requirements of the Electoral Commission, and last year we had quite a lively discussion between people who were more interested in direct democracy and more other people who are more interested in representative democracy. And some people eventually left, and we have very good relations with almost every single person who's ever been in the party executive. They may be standing as independents, they may run an independence network, or they may have started another party, but we get on well.
Good. How I looked at to see how many people that you're standing, and am I correct in saying there's is there 5 or 6 of you?
Yes, there is 5 or 6 of us, and it depends how we count them. So what we've got in Birkenhead, we've got Catherine Evans. In Newbury, yep, you've got it there. We've got Earl. In Wallasey, we've got Ian, and North East Derbyshire, we've got Wes, and Mark is in Paisley and Renfrewshire South. And Vanessa is in Honiton and Sidmouth. Again, for a technical reason, she's standing as an independent. It just wasn't possible to sign her up in time. And I'm also standing, but not as a parliamentary candidate, in Kintyre and the Islands on the 18th of July. So those are all our current candidates.
That's interesting. You're saying that you're standing in as a council candidate.
Yes, yes.
Kintyre and the Islands. Now, that's what area would that be then?
So that's Argyll and Bute. So last year I stood for South Kintyre, and I made a little bit of electoral history, apparently, according to the returning officer, because the qualification that I used, as you'll know, Alistair, having done this in the past, there are 4 qualifications for standing. It's your main place of work, or that you're a registered voter, or that you have premises in the council area, or that, I always forget the last one. There's one that's similar. Or that you live there.
Yes.
That you reside there. Yeah, I think those are the 4. So basically I have a little boat up in Portavadie in Marina, right, which is just across Loch Fyne from Tarbert, and which is on the Kintyre Peninsula. So I use my boat, specifically in the mooring, since it's in land in Argyll and Bute, and that created a bit of a legal precedent. Because I basically argued, I'm occupying land as an owner, or as a tenant.
All right.
And they accepted it. And I must say, generally, the councils, even though I often have a harsh word for councils, but the attitude of council staff towards small and independent parties, small parties and independent candidates, is very, very welcoming. And I really can't praise them enough.
Good to hear. Good to hear. That's presumably you had to stay. Did you stay in the boat for a certain period of time?
No, it's simply
just owning it.
Yeah, it's just owning it and owning, renting the mooring for over 12 months. That gave me the right. So the idea, basically, because I study law, I know that you also have a degree in law, in Scots law, but mine is English and Welsh law, but and I haven't finished yet. But so I'm used to looking at law, as you'd understand, and thinking, what's the purpose of this law? What's the mischief it's trying to prevent? So I simply argued that. I said, well, the purpose of it is that someone who's actually invested in the community in some way, has a live connection, will stand, and that it's not someone who's just parachuted in who doesn't have any connection. So they accepted it. They said, okay, that's unusual, but we accept it.
That's excellent. That is good.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I've always found that the returning officer, certainly in Glasgow, the department is always very friendly, always very helpful, always keen to accommodate everybody. They're not hostile to parties which are not, the main ones that govern the council. They're very, very open to it, and that's one of the good things about living in the United Kingdom for now. Anyway, is that our democratic system still seems to work fairly well. And we've looked at this before, and there are elements that are beginning to kind of creep in and corrupt it. From my point of view, I think the postal vote is a real problematical vote, because for example, just in many ways, for example, today and yesterday, postal votes started going out, and people have already voted. I've seen people on Twitter saying that they've already voted and they've put their vote in the post. Well, the application to apply for a postal vote hasn't even passed yet. Like the application, I think it ends tonight if you want to apply for a postal vote. So, I mean, people are already voting before even the application to apply for postal voting has even passed. The whole thing just seems very unstructured, and it's especially bad for groups like yourself. People in Paisley and Renfrewshire South probably don't know that your party is standing because they haven't seen it on the television, and because you're not a household name. And who knows, they might not find out about your party until the very last day. If you had somebody standing outside a polling station, they won't even find out about you until they see you outside the polling station a few minutes before they go in to cast their vote. So, but by allowing people to vote, 2.5 weeks or whatever before the general election, it's mitigating and disadvantaging these smaller parties who need every single minute right up until the polling moment in order to make themselves known. So this, just get a vote and vote 3 weeks before the election, that's not good for us as small parties. It really mitigates against our best interests. I don't know what your thoughts on polling postal votes are, Alan.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Alistair. Last year, we emailed our supporters and we said, if you want to avoid voter ID, because we're really against that, because we see no need for it and it's just intrusive state surveillance, then you could use the postal vote. And we got some pushback with that, and I think that criticism was justified. We were really seeing it as the lesser of two evils. But one of my worries about postal voting, as well as obvious fraud, which is, it's much easier to do it with postal voting. The other one is that if you have households where there is one older man, for example, who's in charge of an entire household, and it's a large household, and maybe that is the only person who speaks English, then you would have votes for all of these people living there, but actually the chances are there's only one person voting. So therefore you could have a block vote, which doesn't actually reflect, it doesn't allow these people to participate in democracy. Whereas in the polling station, you can't go in voting for, well, I mean, you can vote by proxy, that's true, but at least there's more of a check, of like, there's one person, one vote happening.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And another point of that as well is if you're living in a student flat, as some of us have done in the past, and there's maybe three or four of us, and three or four ballot papers come in, and one person is the only person that's interested in politics, and there's the other three votes there, the other three guys can say, "Oh, we're not interested. You just vote for us, Jimmy." And so Jimmy gets to fill in the other. Now it's illegal if he does that, but he gets to fill in the three votes, and they need to sign it, obviously. But they allow him to make the decision for them. And you get other couples that do that, like maybe the man's not interested in politics, and the woman goes, "Oh, you should vote, Jimmy. You should vote," and he goes, "Oh, you just vote for me." Again, it's illegal if they do that, but that's totally against the spirit of democracy, and it encourages that. Postal voting encourages that kind of behaviour, which seems just wrong. And we say, yeah, postal voting if you're out of town because of work or holidays, then sure, apply. And or if you're in some way disabled and you can't actually make it to the polling station, or you're particularly elderly and you don't have any other way of getting to the polling station, sure, that's how it used to be. But they changed that to voting on demand. You could just apply for it and get it regardless. And I think that's a way that's corrupting the democratic system. And all the parties are complicit in this. I'm not blaming any one party for it, because they all support the postal vote. But if I had my way, it would be just go back to the old system, which you only get it if you need it because of the circumstances on the day. But other than that, going back to what I said originally, I think that our democratic system does work fairly well. It's still largely counted by people. It's not an electronic vote like what they have in some countries, which I've got to watch what I say here on YouTube, because you're not allowed to criticise certain types of voting on YouTube, especially if it involves electricity. But and that's for real. We've had videos removed in the past by YouTube because we've wondered about that, or called into question some elements. So whatever you may think, we're certainly not supportive of any kind of electronic means of casting the vote, because there's all those sorts of dangers. But Alan, what would you say? Obviously, the big thing, the big new party at the moment is Reform. How would you say that you have a unique selling point that differs from Reform if somebody wanted to vote for your party in any of those constituencies where you're standing?
Well, imagine you're walking home from the pub, and some thugs come up and they start beating your mate up. And, you get tore in and you try and defend your mate and you get some bruises and bashes. But another guy just stands there. In fact, he doesn't just stand there. He gives your mate a bit of a kicking as well, And then, so there's a lot of bad feeling. And then several months later, you all meet up. And then this mate who joined in with the beating starts saying, "Look, lads, this was a tough time and it wasn't really clear what everyone should do. But I'm a nice guy, let's just shake hands." And, I don't think that you would be convinced by that act. And that's the reason why I'm not convinced by Reform. Because there was this egregious violation of civil liberties, and it went on for years, and it's still going on. And Reform did nothing about that. They did nothing. And neither did Reclaim, neither did UKIP, neither did a lot of these parties who are now trying to, get the votes. And people who did, like your good self, were vilified for it, and vilified in all sorts of sneaky, sleek ways, dragging in all sorts of nonsense, because people did not have the honesty to say, "I don't like you because you don't allow the state to bully the individual." and that's why we don't like you, and that's why we're going to bring you down. So as for reform, if you look at their manifesto, yes, there is a lot on the manifesto that is good. That has to be said. And there are some cracking reform candidates. So Catherine Evans, the leader of Freedom Alliance, worked together with, I can't remember the gentleman's name at the moment, but he's on the Wirral. I think he's standing in West Wirral, or Wirral West, reform candidate. And he's a lovely gentleman, and they did Rebels on Roundabouts, Yellow Boards action together. And because of people like that, we decided as a party that we would oppose reform on a case-by-case basis. Okay. So where I am, for example, in Kirkintilloch and Cumbernauld, I'm trying to find out something about the reform candidate, and unfortunately I can't find anything out about him, which is a pity, because it's either him or it's the usual suspects. And I've tweeted reform and they haven't said anything. So I don't know. Billy Ross is his name. And on Who Can I Vote For, there is just nothing. There's nothing about him. There's only something about reform. So I don't find that helpful. So if anyone knows something about Billy Ross, please get in touch and tell me, because I may want to vote for him.
I think I do know who that is.
Okay.
Yes. Is it? I'm looking at Billy Ross to contest Bellshill by-election for the British Unionist Party on the 29th of May 2023. If it's that Billy Ross, he's a thoroughly good chap. He's he's a British Unionist. If it's the same Billy Ross.
Oh yes,
and that says Bellshill. So I mean, it must be him then.
Yeah, I've just looked up Who Can I Vote For, and it was him. Okay, well that's good, because actually I was in Bellshill supporting our candidate, and had we known that they were standing, then we would have wanted to talk to them, because I didn't realise that there was an awful lot of shared agenda.
Well, I've met Billy Ross, and I can certainly vouch for him. A great fellow, and if he was involved with the BUP was also against lockdown as well.
Yes.
So the BUP themselves are standing. In fact, there's quite a plethora, as they say, of candidates standing. Let me just fire up the thing here. Get rid of that banner there. Here we are. Scottish Libertarians 4, candidates Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition 4, Communists 3, Socialist Labour 3. Goodness me, that's quite a few different variations on the left. And then you've got your variations on the other side. UKIP standing 3, British Unionists standing 2, STP standing 2, Sovereignty, that's a new Scottish Independence Party, so I believe, standing 2, George Galloway's Workers' Party standing 2, your good self with the Freedom Alliance standing 1 in Paisley and Renfrewshire South, the Heritage Party standing 1 in Dumfries and Galloway, the Liberal Party, and the Socialist Equality Party. Liberal Party in East Renfrewshire, yeah.
Unfortunately, they're opposing Colette Walker of the Independence for Scotland Party. For me, to be honest, constitutional things are on a bit of a back burner for me at the moment. But I like Colette Walker because she knows what a woman is, and there's not many politicians that do. And she has very bravely said this, and her stance on that is a bit clearer than Alipa's stance, which is a bit shaky,
Yes. So strange that such obvious, commonsensical points of view would somehow become, major points of difference. How could you even how could that happen when it's so obvious what things like what a woman is? How could that even become politically controversial? Seems kind of ridiculous. And that's the breath of fresh air that we get from the Freedom Alliance, for example, because you mentioned that some of the reform people were for the lockdowns, but of course so were the Labour Party, the Tory Party, the SNP, the Liberal Democrats and the Greens. And for me personally, that means I couldn't even conceive of voting for them, because if they've done it once, they'll do it again.
Yes, and no, absolutely. And the reason why we even, because you're quite right, I mean, some parties we wouldn't even consider not opposing. All of those that you mentioned, you know, the big five. Because they have no redeeming features whatsoever, whereas Reform does, you know. So that's the position. You mentioned sovereignty. Sovereignty are actually interesting. They are a Scottish Nationalist Party, but their take on it is that they want independence from Europe as well as independence from Westminster, and they're awake. Yeah, and David McCutcheon, the leader, very intelligent gentleman. He actually is an expert in Old Church Slavonic, and very modest gentleman. You wouldn't know that. And it's a very thoughtful party, I find. And they're mostly located up in the northeast, but that's another one that we have a good relationship with. And again, you know, we don't worry about constitutional things because that's not our focus. You know, we are a decentralist party, and we respect the opinions of the community. And you know, if the people of Scotland, you know, decide one way or the other way, that's up to the people of Scotland, and we need to respect that. But that's not what we're pushing for, you know, because there are other things that we need to worry about.
Absolutely, that we shouldn't forget about. And it involves all of these things related to that period of time that happened in 2020 and 2021, and which we still have to, as far as broadcasting on YouTube is concerned, we still have to be careful what we even say about those things, because, I mean, I know you've opposed the hate speech laws, but the way they do it on YouTube is that they just make a long list of things that you can't talk about, including opposition to what went on in 2020 and 2021, but all of that is still there, and some of us remember what happened yesterday and last week and a year ago, and we've got the detailed files on it, and we're not going to forget about it in the way that so many people unfortunately sometimes do. Alan, we're coming to the top of the hour. I'd just like to remind our viewers that you're Dr. Alan McManus of the Freedom Alliance, and you're standing in these seats in Birkenhead. Let's get rid of that Free Alliance banner along the bottom, please. You're standing in Birkenhead, in Wallasey, in Newbury, in North East Derbyshire, in Paisley and Renfrewshire South, and you've got a supporter standing as an independent in Honiton and Sidmouth. And these people are definitely somebody to consider voting for if you're in any of those areas. Now, if people want to get in touch with you, we've got a couple of Twitter addresses now called X, so they can contact the Freedom Alliance or follow the Freedom Alliance at x.com/UK Free Alliance, all one word. And your personal one is x.com/gumptionology. That's gumptionology. Tell us how you came up with that.
Well, I think it was 1990, I read the book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And I don't know why I read it, and it took me decades to try and understand it. Written by Robert Pirsig, it was taken as a hippie classic, very misunderstood. Eventually, because I couldn't understand it, I did a PhD on it, which is a good idea to do if you don't understand something, because you spend a lot of years thinking about it.
Crikey.
Yeah, and it's basically, in a nutshell, what it says is that in the West, we've tended to split consciousness between a functional view and an aesthetic view. And in Eastern countries, they don't tend to do that. There's a more unified view, and that we can learn from that. That's really in a nutshell. So what I did was that I took that idea and I applied that to education. So my PhD was in the philosophy of education.
Okay.
And Percy uses this word gumptionology because he has a Scots background, a Swedish background, but someone in his family was Scots, and it's this Scots concept of gumption, which is kind of get up and go and enterprise and can do and all that stuff. And he basically says that when we're approaching a task, the most important thing to have is gumption, right. And that so it's been interesting for me, I think, because I wasn't really brought up to love the machine, to love technology and bureaucracy and systems and all that kind of thing. That I was a bit more free flowing than that. So this was quite difficult for me to try and come to terms with, but actually it's been good for me to look at all that stuff, and especially now studying law, because as that phrase says, you need to look for the loopholes, and only when you understand the system can you see the loopholes.
Yes. Well, I'm so glad that you've had that journey, and it's so wonderful to know you as a supporter of not just a force for good, but of freedom as well, because goodness knows we need more people like you and your colleagues in Scotland and in the United Kingdom at this moment, as we enter what could be perilous days in some ways, but which will always no doubt be interesting as well. And just before we go, you're also on tiktok.com/Freedom Alliance. So, Alan, thank you very much for everything, and we will speak again. Any final words?
Just thank you so much. This was an unexpected friendship, Alistair, and it was just, I've told everyone about speaking in George Square. I stood up there, I said, my name's Alan McManus, I'm Roman Catholic and I'm an independent supporter. And I got the warmest welcome from all these unionists. Why? Because they were truly interested in free speech. And, something came to me today, and it was about the word Protestant, because as I'm sure you'll know as a student of history, that the word Protestant comes from the Protestant League of German princes. And that what were they protesting against? They were protesting against religious intolerance. So the root of Protestantism is religious toleration. And that's one of the glories of the Reformation that I think that we Roman Catholics would do well to remember and to celebrate. So I'll leave you with that.
Well, thank you very much. Very, very thoughtful point, Alan. Good stuff. Well, we'll say good night, and I wish the Freedom Alliance the very best, and I wish you the very best when you stand in Kintyre and the islands in July as a council candidate. So
thank you, Alistair. Thank you to you, and thanks to Megan too.
Cheers. Bye. Now, that was a good show. As always, folks, I've forgotten to remind you of our crowdfunder. Now, do you see that there? See if you scan that in your mobile phone. You won't see this on TikTok, but it's on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. If you scan that on your mobile phone, you should get taken to crowdfunder.co.uk/Union 2024. Union 2024, which is our crowdfunder. Now, last time I looked, we had 15% of what we need, and it finishes just a few days after the general election. We don't usually do a summer crowdfunder, but we've had to do one this year in order to get us through the next 6 months, and we're calling it our British Summertime crowdfunder to take us up to our Yo Britannia Christmas crowdfunder. And we're not asking for very much in the grand scheme of things. We're asking for £1,707, 1707, to commemorate the Union of Parliaments, and indeed to celebrate the 75th ever British general election, which will be held on the 4th of July. Ansel Mann says the Sovereignty Party seems to be a fragment of the disintegration of the SNP. I think that's correct, in the sense that I think the people that I know of who are in it are certainly not happy with the direction of the SNP, certainly as far as membership of the EU goes. Budgie Burger says Alan has a good tone. He does, doesn't he? He has a very nice voice. We've got 5 copies of these left now. We're down to our very last, and this is the special edition that we made last year of our magazine to celebrate James VI, whose birthday we remember today. You'll get that at our shop, folks. And if you go onto Amazon, you'll get this book. But if you donate a certain amount of money at our crowdfunder, then you'll also, if you donate a certain amount of money at our crowdfunder, you can claim a reward, which includes this book, for free. And basically every reward on our crowdfunder also gets a free copy of our wee book as well. Folks, we are so good to you, we really are. We're going to be back next week with another guest. Should be a candidate who's standing, or a supporter of a party that is standing at the British general election. It's getting closer and it's getting exciting. These are interesting political times. Folks, it's the top of the hour. We're going to say goodbye. It just remains for us to say God bless the United Kingdom and God save the King. See you next week.